Imagine you're just looking at a dietary label on a package of food.
Right, like the little certification sticker.
Yeah, exactly. That little sticker just sitting quietly in the corner of your chicken or whatever.
Mm.
And then realizing it's actually a blueprint for dismantling a corporate monopoly.
It sounds wild when you say it like that, but yeah.
It really does. But today, we are looking at a text that takes what most people assume is, a really simple binary list of what not to eat.
Right, a menu restriction.
Exactly. And it transforms it into this incredibly sophisticated, almost revolutionary economic philosophy.
Completely transforms it.
So we are pulling from the Tolu-e-Islam Digital Archive today. Specifically, this is Lecture 14 by Allama Parwez, which covers verses 114 to 119 of Surah An-Nahl in the Quran.
It's a dense one.
Oh, it's so dense. And the core argument we are unpacking for you today is going to completely shatter the conventional understanding of the word halal.
Because it really forces a total reevaluation of how a society manages its resources. Because the text isn't actually offering a menu, like we said. It's delivering a masterclass on the mechanics of an open society.
Right.
It's about how we handle what is unbound, which is the literal etymological root of halal.
Unbound. Right.
Yeah, unbound. And then also what is beneficial, or tayyib. And what makes this particular lecture so compelling, at least to me, is that Parwez doesn't just stop at the economic theory.
He goes way deeper.
He really does. He delves into the psychology of why humans are absolutely terrified of this kind of open freedom and, how we inevitably construct these elaborate man-made taboos to trap ourselves.
Which is exactly the journey we are taking you on today.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Seriously. Because we are going to synthesize two major currents running through this text. First is the ethics of the table.
Which is really the ethics of global consumption.
Exactly. And the second is the trap of man-made taboos. Because if you are trying to understand the architectural logic of ancient texts, you really need to strip away centuries of cultural baggage, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have to look at the bare mechanics.
But before we even touch the first verse, there is a foundational premise that Parwez establishes about how this entire system, the deen, actually operates.
Yeah, and this is crucial.
It fundamentally rejects the idea of, like, a dictator in the sky.
That is the essential starting point for this whole deep dive. Parwez argues that the Quranic system operates strictly on the principle of cause and effect.
Meaning it's a rationalist framework.
Exactly. It's totally rationalist. When people hear the phrase divine law, they often picture an arbitrary sovereign issuing edicts,
Right, like, do this because I demand obedience.
Yeah, and if you disobey, I will strike you down out of anger.
Lightning bolt from the clouds.
Exactly. The text completely rejects that model. Instead, it presents divine law as a set of immutable, universal mechanics.
Like physics.
Very much like the laws of physics or biology.
So it's less about a judge banging a gavel and more about, say, a doctor handing you a diagnosis.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if a physician tells you, you need to take this antibiotic or your infection will spread, the doctor isn't threatening you.
Right. They aren't angry at you.
No. They are going to personally inject bacteria into your bloodstream if you throw the prescription away. They're just explaining the inevitable biological consequence of your actions.
And we see this mirrored in the physical world constantly. Parwez actually uses the analogy of fire here.
Oh, right, the fire analogy.
Yeah. If you thrust your hand into a flame, the fire doesn't burn you because it is offended by your presence.
It just burned you.
It burns you because combustion is a physical reality. The consequence is just baked into the action. So when the text lays out a directive, it is saying, this is the structural reality of the human societal engine.
If you grind dirt into the gears, the engine fails.
Exactly. It's an objective mechanical warning. It's not an emotional threat.
And that reframing is vital, I think, because it changes how we approach the very first verse Parwez analyzes today, verse 114.
Which seems so simple on the surface.
It does. The directive is incredibly brief. It says to consume what the divine has provided, that is halal and tayyib, and accompany this consumption with shukr, or gratitude.
Sounds pretty standard, right?
Yeah, on the surface, that sounds like a polite request to eat clean food and say grace before dinner. But when we apply that cause and effect framework we just talked about, the linguistics here blow the doors off a simple dietary reading.
They really do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, let's start with halal.
Let's do it.
So the linguistic root of halal means to unbind, to untie, or to dissolve.
To unbind.
Right. And when applied to economics and resources, it establishes a default state of the world. It suggests that the natural, divine state of sustenance is open, it's accessible, and it's free-flowing.
So it's not just a list of things you can't eat.
Not at all. Therefore, a resource is halal not just because it isn't on some forbidden list, but because it hasn't been artificially bottlenecked by human greed.
Wow. So this means hoarding or like creating artificial scarcity to drive up prices, or monopolizing a water source that fundamentally violates the concept of halal.
Absolutely it does.
Even if the resource itself is just plain water.
Because the resource has been bound.
It has been constrained.
Exactly. And that brings us to the necessary companion requirement in the verse, which is tayyib.
Tayyib, which means?
It translates to good, pleasant, beneficial, or wholesome.
Okay.
So a resource might be technically unbound, but if its extraction or consumption degrades the system, it fails the test.
Okay, I'm thinking about this in terms of modern supply chains.
Oh, that's a perfect application.
Right. Because let's say you have a company producing a basic agricultural product. Let's say an apple.
Okay, an apple.
The apple itself is entirely permitted. There's no law against apples. It's unbound.
Sure.
But if that apple was harvested using exploited labor, or if the farming methods are dumping toxic runoff into a local river and poisoning a town downstream, that apple is no longer tayyib. It is actively harmful to the societal engine.
That is the exact tension Parwez is highlighting in the text. The text demands both conditions be met simultaneously.
They have to exist together.
Yeah. The resource must be unbound halal, and its entire life cycle of consumption must be systemically beneficial tayyib.
Why?
You cannot have an economy that thrives on exploitation and claim it aligns with this framework just because the final product isn't biologically toxic.
Right, because the societal toxicity matters just as much.
Exactly.
Which leads us to the third component of this verse, the concept of shukr, which is gratitude.
And this is where the lecture presents an image that completely upends the traditional passive idea of being thankful.
Yeah, because usually gratitude is treated as this internal emotion, right? I feel thankful, I say thank you out loud, and my moral obligation is completely fulfilled.
Check the box, I was grateful.
Right. But Parwez pulls a really fascinating analogy from the text involving a cow to explain what shukr actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, he paints a very specific, highly mechanical picture.
Okay, walk us through it.
So imagine a cow whose udder is completely full of milk. In that state, the milk naturally wants to flow.
Right.
It drips. It provides nourishment to the calf without needing to be violently forced. The lecture argues that true gratitude is an active economic state of maintaining that flow.
Because if you don't milk the cow, it's not just a neutral event.
No, not at all.
The cow experiences intense physical pain. The whole system backs up.
It becomes pathological. Withholding the milk harms the provider and starves the dependent.
It's lose-lose.
Exactly. Therefore, Parwez concludes that shukr is the act of recognizing a blessing by utilizing it properly and ensuring it flows to where it is needed to maintain equilibrium.
So it's an action.
It's an action. If an individual accumulates wealth, gratitude is not sitting in a mansion, looking at a huge bank account and offering a verbal prayer of thanks.
Right.
Gratitude is the active redistribution of that wealth. It is investing in the community, creating opportunity, and keeping the economic lifeblood moving.
So under this definition, holding on to excess resources while muttering a polite thank you to the universe is functionally an act of ingratitude.
It's worse than ingratitude. It is an economic bottleneck.
You are binding what should be unbound.
You are causing the udder to swell and induce pain across the social body. Passive hoarding contradicts the very mechanics of a Halal and Tayyib system. It is a failure of Shukr.
Okay, so this establishes a massive open-source economic ideal. Everything is supposed to be flowing, unbound, and beneficial.
Right.
But that inevitably raises the question for me. I mean, if the default state is this radical openness, what actually constitutes a violation?
What's the boundary?
Yeah, because verse 115 introduces the prohibitions. And for a text that claims to be a comprehensive guide to life, the list of what is restricted is shockingly short.
It really is. Parwez refers to this as the engine of reason and the minimalist law.
Minimalist is the perfect word.
Because the text explicitly limits the prohibitions to 4 things: dead meat or carrion, blood poured forth, the flesh of swine, and sustenance dedicated to anyone other than the divine.
Just 4.
Just
Or I
4.
really want to dig into why it's only 4. because human instinct, especially when building legal systems, is to create an exhaustive, sprawling index of every conceivable infraction.
Oh, yeah. We love rules.
Think of our modern tax codes or legal statutes. They are literally millions of pages long. Why does this framework insist on such extreme minimalism?
Because the nature of a rationalist system requires a blacklist approach rather than a whitelist approach.
Oh, to borrow a modern computing term.
Exactly. Think about a dictatorial regime. It operates on a whitelist. Everything is forbidden by default, and you are only allowed to do the specific things the dictator explicitly permits.
Which totally crushes innovation.
It crushes innovation and freedom. But the Quranic system, according to Parwez, operates on a blacklist.
Meaning everything is allowed except the blacklist.
Precisely. The universe is inherently halal. Everything is open for human exploration, scientific discovery, and aesthetic enjoyment by default. You only need to legally codify the absolute hazards.
So it's basically saying, the entire laboratory is yours to experiment in. Just don't drink the arsenic.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And let's look at the nature of those arsenics in the text.
Let's do it.
The first three, carrion, flowing blood, and swine, are framed as biological hazards. They are physical health directives.
Right. Keep the biological engine running.
But the fourth prohibition is where the text pivots from biology to profound sociology and psychology.
Yeah, it prohibits food or resources dedicated to anyone other than the divine.
Right.
And the lecture specifically discusses this as the concept of Ayahs.
Ayahs, yeah.
Which are offerings made to human authorities, saints, or power structures.
Yeah.
Why is this treated with the exact same severity as eating diseased meat?
Because it represents an ideological pathogen.
Pathogen.
Yeah. When you dedicate your sustenance or your economic output to a human authority, whether that's a priest, a king, or, a local warlord, you are voluntarily creating a monopoly of power. You are taking a resource that the divine intended to be halal, unbound, and flowing for the benefit of all, and you are binding it to a single human ego.
Wow. So you were feeding the machine of human subjugation.
Exactly.
It's essentially an anti-corruption law woven directly into the daily act of eating.
That's exactly what it is.
It ensures that wealth isn't funneled upward into the hands of an elite class claiming a divine right to your labor.
It strips any human being of the right to claim ultimate ownership over the Earth's resources.
Which is incredibly radical.
Extremely. But Parwez points out that the text immediately provides an exception to these prohibitions, which, if you think about it, further proves the rationalist, non-dogmatic nature of the system.
You're talking about the concept of iterar.
Right, iterar, right. Or necessity.
Right, because verse 115 states that if someone is driven by necessity, without willful disobedience or transgressing due limits, there is no sin in consuming these prohibited items.
The survival clause.
Exactly. Now, let's test the boundaries of this a little bit.
Okay, let's do it.
I can see the obvious application, right? You are lost in the wilderness, you're starving to death, and the only caloric intake available is a prohibited animal.
Right. Biology supersedes the rule you eat to survive.
Exactly. But what happens when we apply this to modern, complex social structures?
How do you mean?
Well, let's look at economic necessity rather than just literal starvation.
Okay.
Say someone is working in a fiercely competitive corporate environment.
Oh, I see where you're going.
They are invited to a high-stakes dinner by a superior who has absolute control over their career trajectory, their ability to pay their mortgage, to feed their family.
The boss.
The boss. And the boss orders an extravagant meal that heavily features prohibited items. And he expects the subordinate to partake as a sign of loyalty or, cultural alignment.
Social pressure.
Right. Could that subordinate invoke iterar? Could they say, my economic survival, my family's stability necessitates that I consume this, otherwise I face professional ruin?
It is a very human rationalization.
I mean, I get it.
Oh, totally. But Parwez's reading of the text shuts that loophole down firmly.
Real.
Yes. The necessity described by iterar is strictly anchored to immediate biological survival, the cessation of physical life.
So literally dying.
Literally dying. It is not designed to protect your social standing, your career advancement, or your comfort.
But wait, isn't a threat to one's livelihood a threat to one's life in a capitalist system?
It feels like it.
Yeah, I mean, if I lose my job, I lose my health care, I might lose my home. The anxiety is existential, even if the starvation isn't happening tonight at the dinner table.
That is true. The anxiety is very real. But the text adds the caveat. Without willful disobedience or transgressing due limits. If you compromise the foundational principles of an open, equitable system merely to appease a human authority at a dinner party, you are actually committing the fourth prohibition.
The Ayahs.
Yes. You are dedicating your actions, your consumption, to the ego of your boss. You are bowing to a false authority out of fear.
Wow. Oh, wow. So by trying to invoke the physical loophole to save your career, you inadvertently violate the ideological law.
Exactly.
You've elevated the boss to the status of a deity who controls your sustenance.
And that is exactly why the text demands such intellectual rigor. The moment you start stretching the definition of necessity to include, social comfort or avoiding friction, the entire minimalist framework collapses.
It falls apart.
It does. You start rewriting the law to accommodate your own cowardice or ambition.
And this human tendency to twist logic to avoid friction is exactly what Parwez dives into next.
It's a brilliant pivot in the lecture.
It is. He takes a massive detour into psychoanalysis here, and it provides the mechanical bridge between individual cowardice and systemic societal corruption.
Right. The psychology of it all.
He brings in the metaphor of the iceberg to explain the conflict of our two selves.
It's a crucial transition in the lecture. So we have the conscious mind, the visible tip of the iceberg above the water,
Right.
and then the unconscious mind, the massive hidden structure submerged in the freezing depths.
The 90% we don't see.
Exactly. Parwez explains that when a human being violates a core truth, say, they hoard wealth instead of letting it flow, or they bend the knee to a corrupt authority to save their job, they experience acute psychological pain.
Because they know they did something wrong.
Yes. The truth of their failure hurts.
So what does the mind do? It protects itself.
It rationalizes.
Yeah, it takes that painful truth and pushes it down, deep below the surface of the water into the unconscious. And the conscious mind, sitting comfortably up there in the sunlight, drafts a soothing piece of fiction.
I'm not hoarding wealth. I'm just being fiscally prudent.
Right. Or I didn't compromise my integrity. I was just being socially adaptable for the greater good of my family.
The conscious mind basically acts as a defense attorney for the ego.
That's perfectly said.
But the problem, as Parwez points out, is that the buried truth doesn't just dissolve in the dark water.
It stays there.
It solidifies. It becomes what psychologists call a complex, or what the lecture likens to a psychological splinter.
And a splinter buried under the skin eventually gets infected.
It creates a state of profound cognitive dissonance. The individual is living a conscious lie while their unconscious mind holds the objective truth.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. This internal friction generates a low-level, constant anxiety. They feel a sense of guilt that they can't quite articulate, a sort of spiritual unease.
Okay, let's scale this up. Because Parwez isn't just giving us a therapy session here. He's explaining the origin of religious tyranny.
Right.
How does one person's internal psychological splinter create an entire oppressive social class?
Well, it's really an issue of supply and demand.
Okay, supply and demand.
Imagine a whole society of people who are hoarding wealth, exploiting their neighbors, and bowing to corrupt rulers.
So everyone's compromised.
Right. They all have this buried splinter. They all feel this ambient, agonizing guilt. They desperately want to feel clean, but they absolutely refuse to dig the splinter out.
Because digging it out would hurt.
Because digging it out would mean actually giving up their hoarded wealth or standing up to the boss. They want absolution without reform.
They want a shortcut.
Exactly. And wherever there is a desperate demand for a shortcut, a market emerges.
Oh, wow.
This is where the clergy class is born. Opportunistic individuals step up and say, we see your guilt, we see your anxiety, but don't worry, you don't have to change your systemic economic behavior.
Just buy our product.
Exactly. Just follow this incredibly complex list of rituals. Don't wear this specific fabric. Make sure you chant these specific words in this exact order.
Donate a small percentage of your hoarded wealth to our temple.
Right. And if you follow our labyrinth of rules, God will be appeased and your guilt will be washed away.
That is absolutely chilling.
It's systemic manipulation.
They weaponize the population's cognitive dissonance. The clergy class invents a web of arbitrary taboos, and the people gladly submit to these taboos because performing these rituals is so much easier than actually establishing a Halal and Tayyib society.
It's an elaborate theatrical performance to avoid the hard work of real economic equity.
And this brings us to the explosive core of the lecture, which is verse 116. This verse is a direct linguistic attack on that exact mechanism of control.
Yes.
The text issues a severe warning. It says, do not say with your tongues, this is halal and this is haram.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, because it is basically stripping human beings of the legislative right to declare things universally lawful or unlawful on behalf of the divine.
Parwez unpacks the audacity of what happens when humans ignore this. We've established that the divine law is intentionally minimalist, right? Just for physical and ideological hazards.
To guarantee maximum freedom.
Exactly. So when a clergy class or a legislative body acting with absolute moral authority starts fabricating endless lists of what is permitted and forbidden, they are doing two things.
Okay, what's the first?
First, they are restricting the freedom the system explicitly granted. They are binding the unbound.
And second?
Second, the text states they are literally fabricating a lie against the system.
Wow.
They are usurping divine authority to build their own empires of behavioral control. They aren't mediating between humanity and the divine. They are building a toll booth on a road that was meant to be free.
That is such a powerful image. A toll booth on a free road.
Right.
There is an anecdote in the lecture that Parwez uses to illustrate this, and it is a masterpiece of exposing hypocrisy. It's set during the era of Hitler's regime.
Oh, the story is amazing.
We have a local mullah, a religious authority figure, who has aligned himself with the local political ruler.
A very common historical dynamic, by the way. The political ruler provides the military force, and the religious figure provides the moral justification.
Hand in glove, exactly. So picture the scene. It's a public gathering, perhaps a town hall. The political atmosphere is thick with authoritarian control.
Right.
The mullah stands up to address the people, and he recites a beautiful, sweeping Quranic verse. To Allah belongs everything in the heavens and the earth.
On the surface, it's a statement of profound humility. It suggests that no human can truly own or dominate the world.
Right, it sounds incredibly pious. But then, a man in the crowd, someone who actually understands the practical reality of what is happening, stands up and challenges the mullah.
I love this guy.
He points to the physical ground they are standing on. He says, you stand there and use divine language to say everything belongs to God. But if I walk down the street to the local land registry office and pull the title for this very plot of earth, it doesn't say God in the ownership column.
Nope.
The ink on the paper clearly states that this land is the exclusive, monopolized property of the local ruler.
The sheer tension of that moment, he exposes the entire charade in one stroke.
He reveals how the clergy class actually operates. They use the majestic, unifying language of the divine, everything belongs to God, as a smokescreen.
A total smokescreen.
Practically, in the real world of dirt, water, and economics, they are running PR for a tyrant.
That's exactly it.
They demand the masses submit to God, which functionally translates to the masses submitting to the human monopoly the mullah is protecting.
The hypocrisy is total. They use the sacred to launder the profane.
Wow, yeah.
They invent taboos to keep the population anxious and focused on micromanaging their daily rituals, ensuring the people are too distracted by their own manufactured guilt to notice that the local ruler has stolen the entire economy.
Keep them looking at their shoes so they don't see who owns the sky.
Exactly. If the law remained as simple as the 4 prohibitions, you wouldn't need a sprawling bureaucracy of religious scholars to tell you how to live.
Right, you just use your brain.
You would just use your reason and participate in the open flow of resources. But by complicating the law, they manufacture dependency.
They invent the disease of anxiety and then sell the cure of their own specialized interpretation.
Supply and demand.
But Parwez doesn't just leave it at exposing the scam. In verse 117, he explores the inevitable societal consequence of this arrangement.
The fallout.
Right. The text describes the fate of those who invent these false restrictions. It says their reward is mata'an qalil, a brief enjoyment followed by a painful penalty.
A brief enjoyment.
Let's look at the mechanics of that. What does this brief enjoyment look like in the real world?
Well, it refers to the immediate short-term gains of the clergy and the corrupt elite.
Okay.
By hoarding resources and selling absolution, they acquire wealth, political access, and unquestioning obedience. They get the lavish estates, the front row seats at the banquets, and the psychological thrill of dominating others.
The perks of being at the top.
Right. It works for a time.
But the text promises a painful penalty. And applying Parwez's cause and effect framework, this isn't lightning striking from a cloud. This penalty has to be the mechanical consequence of their actions.
Right. Parwez refers to this as social physics.
Social physics, I like that.
Yeah. When you take an open, flowing economy, a halal system, and you choke it with unnecessary rules, monopolies, and fear, you create massive social friction.
Friction slows things down.
It does. Think about what happens when a society is paralyzed by the fear of breaking an endless web of man-made taboos.
Innovation completely dies.
Absolutely.
You see this in hyper-bureaucratic corporate structures all the time.
Oh, for sure.
If a company implements a policy where every single email, every minor decision requires 3 levels of managerial approval and an ethics committee review, no actual work gets done.
Stalls out.
The employees spend 90% of their energy trying to navigate the rules and appease the rule makers, and only 10% of their energy producing anything beneficial. The system just seizes up.
Now scale that up to an entire civilization.
Oh, man.
A society burdened by false piety becomes a society paralyzed by guilt and terror. The people stop exploring the physical universe because they are afraid a new discovery might violate an obscure taboo.
Right, like Galileo and the telescope.
Exactly. They stop engaging in open trade because the rules of commerce have been rigged to favor the elite. The flow of Tayyib, the beneficial progress of humanity, grinds to a halt.
So the painful penalty isn't magical.
No, the painful penalty is the inevitable stagnation, decay, and eventual collapse of that society. The engine seizes because it was starved of oil and filled with sand.
So the society literally rots from the inside out because the natural open flow of the universe has been dammed up by human ego.
Yes.
But wait.
What's up?
If we're establishing this minimalist open framework as the universal ideal, what about the historical exceptions?
I know where you're going.
Because anyone looking at the text or looking at history is going to immediately point to verse 118. A historian would ask, if the law is an engine of reason, why did the Jewish people, who were also following a divine framework, have an incredibly complex restrictive dietary code?
It is the most obvious counterargument, and the text addresses it directly. We are talking about highly specific restrictions, right?
Yeah. Avoiding animals with certain types of claws, forbidding the consumption of specific fats from otherwise permissible animals.
It seems to completely contradict the minimalist blacklist we just discussed.
It looks like a massive whitelist.
It does, but verse 118 provides the crucial context. The text states that these excessive, highly detailed restrictions were not a blueprint for an ideal society.
They weren't.
No, they were placed upon them as a punishment.
A punishment. Wow. That changes the entire paradigm.
It changes everything. The lecturer explains that due to their systemic rebellion, their crimes, and their persistent refusal to maintain the equitable flow of resources.
Their failure to establish Halal and Tayyib.
Right. Because of that failure, the open freedom of the minimalist law was temporarily revoked. It was a localized constriction.
Like putting a heavy restrictor plate on an engine that is spinning out of control.
That's a perfect analogy. So because they couldn't handle the freedom responsibly, the freedom was converted into a prison sentence. Exactly. But Parwez highlights a profound and deeply tragic irony in how human history unfolded after that.
Okay, what's the irony?
Later generations looked back at those strict, punishing rules, and they completely misunderstood the context.
Oh, no.
Yes. They saw their ancestors struggling under this heavy burden of complex dietary and behavioral restrictions, and they thought, look how disciplined they were.
They thought it was a good thing.
They thought, look how much they suffered for the law. This must be what extreme piety looks like.
Oh, wow. They looked at the handcuffs and thought they were bracelets.
That is precisely the psychological trap. They started adopting those restrictive chains voluntarily out of a mistaken sense of virtue.
It's like Stockholm Syndrome with religious laws.
It is. They believed that suffering, restriction, and denying themselves the bounties of the earth made them holier. It's the ascetic impulse. We see it across countless cultures.
We convince ourselves that if we are miserable, constrained, and constantly policing our every bite of food, we must be doing something pleasing to the divine.
Yes. We mistake the chains for jewelry.
We think the harder and more complicated something is, the more divine it must be. We romanticize the punishment and turn it into tradition.
But the text is screaming the exact opposite.
Divinity is the simple, open flow.
Exactly. The complicated restrictions are evidence of human failure, either as a punishment for rebellion or as a mechanism of control by a corrupt clergy.
It's a devastating critique of human religious history. We continuously build our own cages and then praise ourselves for sitting inside them.
It really is.
Which brings us to the final critical piece of the puzzle in this lecture.
The way out.
Yes, the way out. If you are listening to this and realizing you've been doing this, If you recognize that you are trapped in cognitive dissonance, that you've been following false taboos or hoarding resources or mistaking a prison sentence for piety, how do you get out?
How do you repair the system?
Right. That leads us to verse 119, the mechanism of true repentance.
And just as the text redefined halal and gratitude, it completely redefines repentance.
Of course it does.
The verse offers a path back for those who have done wrong out of jahala, which translates to ignorance or a lack of understanding.
Okay, ignorance.
But the prescribed solution is not what we typically associate with religious repentance.
Right, because the typical association is highly emotional.
Very emotional.
You realize you've done wrong, you feel an overwhelming sense of guilt, you sit on a prayer mat, you weep, and you offer 1,000 verbal apologies to the universe. You ask for forgiveness.
Which, in the rationalist framework Parwez is outlining, is entirely insufficient.
Insufficient.
Because weeping doesn't fix a broken engine.
Good point.
The text uses a very specific operational word, isla.
Isla. To reform, to repair, to make positive amends.
Yes. It is an action verb, not a state of feeling. The lecture uses a beautifully simple, relatable analogy to drive this home.
Okay, I love these analogies.
Imagine a young boy who misses 3 days of school. He didn't do it out of malice, right? He genuinely misunderstood the calendar and thought there was a holiday.
So that is jahala, ignorance.
Exactly. When he finally returns to school and realizes his mistake, he is devastated.
Okay, so the passive emotional version of repentance is that the boy sits at his desk, cries his eyes out, feels terrible about himself, and apologizes profusely to the teacher.
Right. He feels genuinely remorseful.
But structurally, what has actually changed?
Nothing.
He is still 3 days behind in his coursework. His emotional state did not alter the reality of his deficit.
Precisely. Therefore, what does Ayla demand of this student?
Action.
True repentance means he has to go to the library. He has to stay late after school. He has to do double the homework to catch up on the lessons he missed.
He has to do the work.
He has to put in the physical and intellectual labor to restore his academic equilibrium. Ayla is the act of balancing the ledger.
Now let's apply that schoolboy analogy to the massive economic and societal concepts we've been discussing today.
Let's do it.
If repentance is Ayla restorative action, what does that look like for an adult operating in this system?
Well, it means that if you engaged in hoarding wealth, true repentance isn't just feeling a deep spiritual guilt about your greed.
Right, because your guilt doesn't feed a starving neighbor.
Exactly. Isla requires you to actively dismantle your hoard and redistribute that wealth back into the flowing economy.
You have to make the resource halal again.
You have to unbind it.
And if you are part of that clergy class, or even just, a manager in a corporation who has been enforcing false taboos and creating unnecessary anxiety-inducing rules to maintain your own power,
then your repentance is actively dismantling the bureaucracy you built.
tearing down the toll booth.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's publicly admitting the rules were a mechanism of control and working to restore the freedom and autonomy of the people you restricted. You have to untie the knots you tied.
You cannot just apologize to the divine for creating social friction.
No, you have to actively lubricate the gears of society to get it moving again. The system demands a return to equilibrium. Remorse is internal, but Isla is an economic, social, and physical action.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. We have covered incredible dense ground today, so let's take a moment to look at the vast landscape Parwez has painted for us in just these few verses.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started by peeling away the sticker on the meat package, realizing that Halal and Tayyib are not a menu, but the foundational principles of an open-source, flowing economy.
Right.
We learned that the divine law is inherently minimalist, restricting only absolute objective hazards in order to guarantee maximum human freedom, discovery, and progress.
And we explored the psychological depths of cognitive dissonance. The iceberg. Seeing how individuals bury their failures, creating a demand for cheap absolution.
Yeah.
We saw how opportunistic classes rise to meet that demand, inventing false, man-made taboos that usurp divine authority, secure their own brief enjoyment, and ultimately cause massive societal friction and decay.
We recognize the tragic human flaw of mistaking historical punishments for high virtue.
Choosing to wear chains and calling them jewelry.
Exactly. And finally, we learned that true virtue isn't about wrapping ourselves in the anxiety of unnecessary rules. And true repentance isn't just weeping in the dark.
It's about Ayla.
Taking active, physical, restorative action to keep the beneficial flow of life moving for everyone.
By understanding these verses through Parwez's rationalist lens, we have essentially reclaimed the right to a rational, wholesome, unbound life.
Unbound.
And this intellectual unbinding sets us up perfectly for the climax of this text.
Oh, I'm ready.
In our final session together on this material, Lecture 15 of 15, covering Ayat 120 to the end, we will look at the ultimate human archetype of the system.
Okay, who is it?
We are going to look at the figure of Ibrahim, who the text describes as an ummah, a whole nation unto himself.
A one-man nation.
Exactly. And he achieves this status entirely because of his absolute, unwavering commitment to reason over tradition.
I literally cannot wait to unpack that. But before we close the book today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to turn over in your mind.
Give it to them.
We've seen how societies construct elaborate cages out of fear and ego, mistaking their self-imposed restrictions for piety. So take a hard look at your own landscape.
Yeah.
Look at your daily routines, your workplace, your social circles, or your own internal belief system. Where are you bowing to a man-made taboo, a rule, an anxiety, or restriction that serves absolutely no rational beneficial purpose other than to limit your potential and mistaking it for virtue?
Wow.
Are you letting a simple label dictate a small, confined life when the architecture of the universe is begging you to participate in an unbound economy? Think about that.